Hello, this is Stephen Whitfield, a drilling contractor. With me right now is John Wardt, president of Wardt and Company. He co-authored a paper that was presented at the 2022 IADC SPE International Drilling Conference on history, disruptors, and the future of changing well construction business models. And we're going to discuss that paper a little bit here right now. Mr. DeWart, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So this paper focuses on contracts, particularly the value of non-traditional forms of contracting over the conventional day rate model. And one assertion that you guys make in the paper is that the day rate model is naturally misaligned between operators and drilling contractors and service companies. So could you tell me in what ways is it misaligned?
So first, Stephen, thanks for the question. I'd like to thank my co-authors. We had seven authors altogether, 6 co-authors with me, and they represented operators, drilling contractors, and service companies. So it was a broad spectrum and it was a team effort. If I can go back to the history, the land rig drilling business was outsourced by oil companies in the 1930s and 40s, and it was outsourced on a footage contract basis. Then standard contract was introduced, and with that, contingencies for day rates. So day rates were brought in for things like wireline logging and production casing. And essentially what we've had since then is time and materials contracts. The time is paid for the equipment and the people, and it's the consumption of the materials. So the longer you work on a project, the more dollars you get, or conversely, the shorter, the less dollars you get, looking at it on a per well basis. And of course, when you have rework on a well, that also gets paid by the time and materials contracts. So in fact, there's no direct reward for improving technology. If a service company or drilling contractor brings along new technology, there isn't a direct reward within the payment of the day rate contract. Suppliers' investments take a long time to recover then. So if they invest, they're actually at risk for far longer than they would be if they were getting compensation immediately. And ultimately, there's no mechanism in there to drive the supplier to invest in delivering a better well for the operator.
Conversely, how do outcome-based contracts help better align operators and contractors and service companies?
Well, first, I think we have to look at what's the objectives of the operator. So if we look at it for a well, it's about schedule. So that's the start date, end date, the date production comes on. It's about cost. So it's the budget, the AFE, and then the actual cost. It's about data. So it's wellbore data and drilling data. And with data, we have the attributes of the data like accuracy, latency, frequency, etc. And then it's about functionality of the well. What's the well going to do during its lifetime? And for functionality, we actually capture that with quality. So what's essentially the uptime and the performance of the well. And so a results-based contract would be tied to these objectives. And one simple example that I could give is zonal isolation. If we were to contract for zonal isolation instead of cementing, it would be an outcome-based contract that's aligned to the goals of the operator. And then usually there's an incentive tied into these kind of contracts that does pay for delivering a better product, and it often comes out of sharing of savings on the well costs. And the other thing that happens with this is that the operators now getting the contractors and suppliers to be involved in their planning process and their well design. And with an outcome-based contract, you have the alignment through those processes as well as the execution. And I think right now what we see in the business is the conversation is turning to better boreholes. People are talking about delivering an improved borehole for both the drilling process to get extended reach wells, but also for the completion process and production process later on.
So your paper also discusses the disruptors that are causing the industry to rethink its contracting models. Could you talk a little bit about what those disruptors are? What makes them disruptive?
So the big disruptors right now that we see is digitalization and automation. And what we see is that this is driving outsourcing in the industry. And what we've mapped out in the paper is a transition from where the industry competed on products through a complement on services to collaborate on solutions. So as digitalization and automation solutions come about, there's a drive for much more collaboration, which then means we need a different kind of contract. People are sharing data a lot more now than they were in the past, and this has been driven by remote operations and an uptake of drilling applications, or so-called drilling apps. And now what we see as well is the drilling contractors are adding services, and they've started to ask for rewards for impacting the outcome of the wells. So for the first time, what we're seeing is now a pull on the outcome or outcome contracting process.
So the paper also mentions the risk associated with industry activity levels driven by oil price and how that risk can be hard to build into compensation systems. Why is that? What sort of risk are you talking about here?
So outcome-based contracts can drive increased activity because the operator is getting a better product, or it's getting lower cost per barrel, or whatever their business drivers are. And so in theory, there's more work that comes from it. But when we have large oil and gas price swings, the drilling activity changes, and we know that. So below, say, $40 a barrel or above $80 a barrel, the price of oil actually has a bigger impact than what you can accomplish by improving the product that you're delivering. And to manage this in the future, what we need to have is a transparency on activity levels so that the risks are foreseen and that people can see how they can reduce them. But ultimately, I think that the oil price does win the day.
So the paper also presents a pair of case studies, one for onshore and one for offshore, that illustrate the value of outcome-based models. Could you talk a little bit about these case studies? What lessons did you learn from them?
So the first case study was on alliances, and alliances started back in the mid-90s in the North Sea, and now they've come back around again and are being practiced in Norway and the UK sector. And the alliance actually builds a outcome-based style of contract over and above the frame agreements, which actually shares the cost savings or overruns on a gain share mechanism. And one of the alliances that's in effect now, they've actually claimed that they've drilled 7 of the top 10 fastest jackup wells in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea. So they're claiming significant success for it. And then the other one is this Tennessee University study of outsourced contracts, where they developed some rules for doing this. And they talk about outcome-based versus transaction-based models, focusing on the what, not the how. So again, focusing on zonal isolation and not cementation. And then having clearly defined and measurable outcomes. And one of these US land operators has actually adopted this method. And what they've achieved is a new designed well that is a slimmer design that they don't believe they would have accomplished without doing this outcome-based contracting. And then the lessons, well, they're fairly complicated to manage, but one of the lessons is the governance structure over the customer-supplier relationship. It's needed to be in place to continuously align and address issues as they arise. Essentially, it's not possible to cover everything in the wording of the contract. And then a systems architecture of the organization can actually bring alignment from all the different subsystems to the outcomes that are desired. And then they drive an improvement process that's within the system or subsystem that can then be adopted elsewhere. And one of the big ones is cultural change, because we need to change to collaboration. And this is one of the attributes that's been around in lean manufacturing since the 1970s.
Well, John, thanks again for taking the time to speak with us about this paper, contracting models. That seems to be a big topic within the industry. Everybody's talking about what we're going to do here. So thanks again for providing that insight into this issue. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And thank you for visiting Drilling Contractor.